Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Nicole.
And I'm your host, Jacqueline. You're listening to the first season of Perfictionist.
Together they will rise, or together they will fall. Aelin Galathinius has vowed to save her people, but at a tremendous cost. Locked in an iron coffin by the Queen of the Fae, Aelin must draw upon her fiery will as she endures months of torture. The knowledge that yielding to Maeve will doom those she loves keeps her from breaking, but her resolve unravels with each passing day. With Aelin captured, her friends and allies have scattered. Some bonds will grow even deeper, while others will be severed forever. But as destinies weave together at last, all must stand together if Aurelia is to have any hope of salvation. Sarah J. Maas' #1 New York Times best-selling Throne of Glass series draws to an explosive conclusion as Aelin fights for her life, her people, and the promise of a better world.
In this episode, we are going to be discussing the first half of part 1 of Kingdom of Ash, and more specifically, we're going to include the prologue, which there are 2 of, as well as chapters 1 through 31.
Yes, and a fair warning to our listeners, there will be spoilers as we discuss major plot points and our opinions of them. But this podcast is by no means a substitute for reading the book. There are plenty of intricate details that we just won't have the time to touch on.
So as we mentioned, we start with 2 prologues. The first of the 2 prologues is called The Prince, and it is from the perspective of Rowan. And he's been searching for Aelin the entire 2 months, and he just looks like, or not looks, but he sounds like he's just so lost and just very like a bit out of it, a bit like tunnel visioned, a little focused on his whole entire focus is on finding Aelin. And I believe he mentioned something like if it weren't for his companions that he's traveling with, that he would just have been like utterly lost. Like they kind of keep him focused on his goal while he's navigating the heartbreaking task of trying to find Aelin.
Yeah, when you said like he's lost and stuff, yes, for sure he was lost, but I thought that it was portrayed really well, that it was basically like what I think Sarah was trying to get across is like this fey male, just like completely instinctually being driven by the mate bond to find his wife, right?
Yeah.
And there was nothing else in his head. And like you said, the tunnel vision. And it was almost like he had almost lost his own identity, and he was just completely just so focused on reuniting with Aelin that it was just very like animalistic, I thought.
Yeah, no, that was an excellent way of describing it.
So meanwhile, Aelin is being held on an island in the middle of a very isolated, misty river. So it's concealed by this sort of ever-present mist, is what I was given to understand. And so she can hear like the endless like roaring of the river, which I almost feel like in itself is a little bit torturous for someone whose power is like fire. She's surrounded by just water constantly. And it's not like you can turn the sound off because that's just where she is. And yeah, and so Karen is just torturing her, and he's if you recall him, he's like very sick, and he's sadistic and loves the torture. But Aelin has been trained in how to endure torture thanks to her assassin's training. So even though it's like mind-bogglingly bad, she's actually holding up and applying some techniques I think that she learned. But she's really starting to lose her grip on reality, and it's gotten to the point now where she's not sure if what's happening around her is real or is not. So Fenris, who is there kind of with her, being forced to watch this torture and unable to do anything about it due to the blood oath he has with Maeve, you sort of learn that they have this silent way of communicating, and he can like let her know things are real as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they have like a blink code, and I don't remember what everything means, but like I think like one blink is no, two yes, like something along those lines, and then a certain
I
number
think
of blink
3 is
means like
I'm
I'm here,
okay, and 4 is
and
I'm
then
here,
four is
I'm
I'm
with
here.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Yeah, and
believe.
it's just so
Yeah.
like the fact that they managed to create that, and they both seem to understand it, and
Hmm.
oh, it just kind of goes to
It's
show
very
like,
heart-wrenching.
hmm
Like, Fenris, all he can do is blink at Aelin, like, I'm here, I'm with you. And it's like, oh, it's just really gut-wrenching.
yeah, and like kind of the bond that has solidified between the two of them. I
A
think it like
trauma
shows
bond,
that.
I think.
Yeah, I believe that is what that's called.
I believe so.
hmm And Maeve is using like illusions and dreams in order to manipulate Aelin, which is, I think, part of the reason why she's losing her grip on reality is because
Hmm.
she's not only being physically tortured, but also psychologically tortured in the sense that her reality is being warped. And this reminded me of in Mockingjay when Peeta gets like
Oh, yeah.
infected with the, what are they, tracker jackers or something
Yeah.
like that, and their venom, and then is like forced to watch certain scenes, and then that
Yeah.
like reroutes his brain. And I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, are we gonna see something like that with Aelin, where like the
Right.
manipulation, like the psychological manipulation mixed with the physical torture, is that gonna lead to some sort of rewiring in her brain that's gonna be like a challenge she has to overcome later in the story?
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. Ooh. Yeah. I am concerned about that.
Yes. It's the whole intro, like, and this is like the second prologue entitled Princess, in which we see Aylin's perspective, and the whole scene, the first scene with her in it, is just like so impactful. And I think it really brings the reader back to the reality of what's happening in this world, in the story that we're reading. Because when you leave Empire of Storms, it's just like this heightened emotion, this huge cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And I think the prologues really helped solidify where we're supposed to be emotionally in this story, which is
Right.
helpful because you're jumping in to a very
Hmm.
high impact emotional story, which typically at the beginning of a novel, you're not this far into the emotion yet. But it's
That's right.
like, as readers, we need to be mentally prepared for
Yeah. And
almost
you,
like an
yeah.
end game at the beginning.
That's, yeah, exactly. The intensity of it, you mean, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. And I think too, it was very important because we had also, if you read it as author intended, you're coming off of Tower of Dawn. So you do need
hmm
to like be reintegrated into that super fast paced, high stake, intense environment.
No, exactly. One thing I thought was very interesting with the scene with Aelin is the first time Maeve is mentioned within the prologue, she's mentioned as having like a spider's grin. And I thought
Yeah.
that was so
Hmm.
interesting now that we know what we do know about her connection to, what are they called?
The
The
Karen
Karen,
Quee.
yes, the Karen Quee spiders. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, has it always been described this way? Am I only now picking up on it because I know of that connection?
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't
Good
know.
question. Yeah, I feel like when I was first starting this series, I didn't quite understand that every single detail would matter.
Mhm.
And
And there's so
now we're
many.
on the last book. Now we're like, everything's intentional. And so, yeah, I think the spider's smile thing, that's intentional. It's like just
Mhm.
breadcrumbs that she leaves for us. So, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to go back and read it and see if she's described that way from the very beginning.
Yes, I am looking forward to my eventual reread of this series
hmm
because I will be definitely keeping a sharp eye out for a lot more things.
So, this book is a little bit different because it is the last book in a long series. And as you said, we're coming, if you read it in the purest order, you're coming off a Tower of Dawn. And like it might have been quite a while since you've read Empire Storms. And some people,
Hmm.
if you read this as they were coming out, it could have been quite a while since both those books before reading Kingdom of Ash. So the first six chapters are essentially putting the reader back into the minds of each of the characters, letting the reader know where each of the characters are, and reminding the reader of different major events that happened in both Empire Storm and Tower of Dawn to kind of catch everybody up and make sure we're all on the same page of what's kind of going down. We have Idian, Lysandra, kind of the majority of the allies that Aelin had sort of collected, all in Terrasen. So they have officially made their way up. As we said, 2 months have passed, so they've made their way up to Terrasen. They're staying, I believe, in Ren's, or around where Ren's kind of lordship is located.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, because the lords still technically control Terrasen, like they still don't see Aelin as a queen, we have them making all the decisions for the Bane and therefore the allies, because the allies are kind of following whatever the Bane does.
Right.
So Idian's kind of having to navigate between doing what he thinks is right for Aelin's cause and Terrasen as a whole, while still being controlled by the lords and their decisions.
Yeah. Sort of interesting, like the political things that are going on behind the scenes as well, because Lysandra is obviously posing as Aelin, which every time I was reading about her posing as Aelin, I personally felt pretty nervous.
Me too.
That, you know, it's like they're going to find her out. But we also get to see Evangeline and Fleetfoot. And Fleetfoot's become kind of like chubby from all the like loving and doting, and she's getting all these treats. And it's just, I thought it was a really nice touch that Sarah put that in there, that we haven't forgotten about Fleetfoot. She's still around, and it sounds like she's doing really well. And I think that's just such a nice touch, because it easily could have just been forgotten, I think.
Yeah, I love that as well.
Yeah, and we also learn that Morath is marching to Terrasen, which I think feels pretty expected at this point.
In some ways it's expected, but to be honest, I actually didn't think the fighting was going to start this early. I thought there was going to be a lot more build up, a lot more kind of like reintegrating us back in the story. But no, Morath's coming. Like, first few chapters, and they're like heading to Terrasen, and you're like, oh boy, it's going to be a long book.
Yes, and so I wanted to see what you thought of this, because this kind of like struck me as I was reading it, because now this is the final book in the series, so we're going to be seeing everybody's perspectives. We're no longer jumping from like, okay, well, we're doing like these characters' perspectives in this book, and then these characters' perspectives in this book. Like, you know, it was a few books until we were introduced to Manon and stuff like that. And now we're seeing everybody's perspectives, and it just gives a very like Avengers feel almost.
Yes. Yeah, there's like a lot going on.
When they come back together, it's like Avengers assemble, you know, like.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that's what's going to happen at the end, is that everyone is eventually going, like, all the storylines will link together at the end for this ultimate battle.
Yeah.
But who knows what's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
I think that would make sense.
Yes.
Or maybe not at the very end. Maybe there's going to be a situation where it's like the very end of the book is like 10 years in the future. It might go down that road.
Right. That could be kind of good. So Adion and Lysandra, they had been, I almost feel like they're kind of maybe mates, but we don't know. But they're obviously, they were very attracted to each other. And I think Lysandra still feels the same way. However, she's feeling extremely betrayed because of this plan that Aelin formed with Lysandra about, and Rowan too, about like becoming Aelin in case something like what has happened to Aelin happens. But if it goes on and on and on, you know, there was this plan to have Adion and Lysandra procreate. And it was because Adion is often said to look like Aelin's twin. And so it could be believable then that his children would bear some of the same resemblance, obviously, to him, and therefore Aelin, continuing the ruse that Aelin is still there, kind of thing. And so Adion, although it's like a pretty genius plan, they did not like consult Adion about this.
Which I'm a little confused why. Like, I feel like they would have. I'm a
I
little
know.
surprised they didn't.
I know. I think probably what happened was things were happening so quickly that it just,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, that's what I'm thinking.
Mhm.
But Aedion is extremely feels deeply betrayed by this whole thing. And he can barely stand to look at Lysandra because I think it's not just that they formulated this plan without him. I think it probably goes deeper than that. Like they're essentially going to rob him of his bodily autonomy, to use him for his genetics, like to create an heir. So he's having a really hard time with this. And I think that's like a very realistic reaction.
Mhm. And I think it also is probably like he has the right to have an even stronger reaction given his reputation. I think he was kind of almost seen as like a, I don't know, ladies man, but not in a way that he had a choice about it. Almost
Right.
like Finnick in,
Yeah.
again, Hunger
Right.
Games. It kind
Yeah.
of is giving that sort of a vibe.
Hmm.
So the fact that that's his history, and he talked about like that's kind of how why he thinks him and Lysandra connect
That's
so
right.
well is because they have a sort of shared history in the sense that they were both forced to do things that they didn't necessarily want to do.
Maybe looked at
And
as
now,
sex symbols without
mhm,
their like that not that's not why that was not their choice,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And so now that again, he's being forced to do something in the same realm.
Yeah. Something
So,
else that occurred to me as well is it's not just like that, but also if they did have a child, he'd have to present to the world that he's not the father,
mhm.
which I think could be really, depending on the person, but that could be kind of tragic, right? Like in
Well, yeah, especially since I think he wanted to have children with Lysandra.
Mhm.
Like he confessed he wanted to
Yes.
marry her. Like
Yeah.
this, it's like he wants this life, but he wants it with her. And then
She was
he's
the
being,
first person he actually wanted to pursue, like,
mhm.
and the last person he wanted to pursue. So this is so sad.
It is so sad. I really hope they work it out.
Me too.
They must. Although I have not actually seen any art spoilers that they do, which does not bode well.
But speaking of art spoilers, I don't see a lot of Aedion period though. It's like
True.
people don't really draw him that much.
Mm.
I've seen a few, but
Mhm.
not not like all the other characters. It's like he's forgotten.
Yeah. And most of the ones I see of Lysandra is like her in half ghost leopard form or her with Evangeline.
Hmm.
So, which is makes sense. Those are
Yeah,
sweet.
yeah.
One thing I noted about sort of the introduction of this group of people is they mention a wolf tribe living even further north of Terrason, kind of in the
Mm.
mountains. I'm like, that's an oddly specific thing to mention randomly. So I don't think it is
So I'd
random.
like to know, like, what is this wolf tribe? What are they? Are they like wolf shifters? Are they just like what are they? Are they people who have wolves as pets? Did they say? Like I can't recall.
They didn't say, but my assumption when I was reading it was just that they are a tribe of people, like human people, who live super far north. So they have, like, maybe they have like wolf symbolism or
Oh,
actual
okay.
wolves as
That
like
makes
pets.
sense. Okay, that makes sense. I was thinking there would be like wolf shifters, but I was like, but they didn't mention that, so that's kind of like
No, I'm completely making it up. That's just what I created in my brain. All they said was that there is a wolf tribe. That's
yeah.
literally it, that they
Well, it
exist.
should be interesting to find out more about that. Obviously, we're going to because otherwise, why mention it, right?
Yeah, I think it'll be like one of those miraculous
Mm.
saves when it looks like absolutely nothing can help whatever group is in trouble. And
Right.
then whoosh,
They'll
swoops in
come
the
in.
wolf tribe.
Yeah. That could be cool. So, and then moving on to Alide. So she's in the, like, I feel the most dangerous spot. Well, no, they're all in danger, but she, like, despite her sort of handicap with her bum ankle or foot,
Mhm.
she's always with people who are like just in the thick of it. So Gabriel, Lorcan, and Rowan, they've been searching for Aelin, as we kind of mentioned earlier, and they're south of Doranel. And Alide and Lorcan are not on good speaking terms, unsurprisingly, with the way that Lorcan kind of screwed everything up for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But so in Empire of Storms, if you recall, this was such an intense moment where Lorcan was like, after the blood oath was broken, and he was like crawling after Mabel, and Alide was so disgusted. It was like pathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And then she finally kind of says, like, you crawled after her, and he's like, what? Like, he didn't even realize that was a thing, because he then tells Alide, like, no, I wasn't crawling after Maeve, I was crawling after Aelin. And at
Mm-hmm.
this reveal, I was like, oh, oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Well,
Like,
because we were all disgusted with him. I think Allied and readers alike were like, what a horrible person.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then it turns out actually he wasn't as devastated about the thing that we thought he was. He truly did convert to Aelin's side.
Yeah, and I think like the breaking of the blood oath is very physically painful and difficult to get through, even if you don't like care for the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's going through all of this like physical intensity, but he's still trying to crawl after Aelin. And I thought,
Yeah.
like, oh, Alide, like, how can you be angry with him now? Like, he did have the blood oath. Like,
Yeah.
I think it'll just take her some extra time to kind of come to terms with that. But
Mm-hmm.
I find their relationship really interesting because she's human. So she's human, but she has like a goddess sort of whispering to her. So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, well, why is that? And also, I'd like to know, like, obviously, Lorcan and Alide, like, we ship them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how is that going to work? Because he's immortal, right? That
And she does have the witch blood, but there's nothing to indicate that that's going to mean that she'll have the life of a
span.
witch.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
there's nothing to necessarily say it's not possible that she could have maybe not a witch long life, but maybe a half witch long life. So
Right.
something in between. So they'd
Yeah.
have more time together
Yeah.
than if she were just fully human.
Yeah.
So another thing we're reminded of is the whole is Rowan and Aelin mates? And we do find out at the end of Empire Storms that yes, they are.
Mhm.
And now we get to kind of see that from Rowan's perspective. So he has fully come to terms with the fact that it was Maeve who manipulated him into thinking that Lyra was his true mate. And now that he's reflecting back on the situation and everything he's gone through with both Lyra and Aelin, he's like, oh, I was such a fool not to see it. And he's
Mhm.
like thinking about all these different experiences he had, like the first time he bit Aelin and how it like was presented as like him just trying to get
Claiming.
her to shift. But
Yeah.
then you rightfully said it actually was his like mate bond kind of taking over him and trying to claim her. But in the story, it makes the readers think like, oh no, that's not what it was. But really,
Yeah, it was confusing though, because in the story I remember distinctly it said it was a claiming, like it was so claiming. And I was like,
mhm,
that's a strange description to use if it's not like a mate thing. And then in this particular part that you're talking about, he's talking about how he remembers, like we finally hear his side of that, how he
mhm.
remembers when he bit her and tasted her blood, how her blood sang to him.
Yeah. So it's like now they've both kind of come to terms with like, yes, we are definitely mates. We were mates the whole time. And that's why there was this strange connection between us. It wasn't the Karen and Bond that we kind of like used
Yeah,
as an excuse.
yeah. I yeah. I thought it was very poignant how Rowan's thinking about this mate bond and how he realizes throughout all the centuries that it's been Aelin, like the mate bond is what's been like pulling him through, and he's
Mhm.
always been searching for her. And I just thought that was so beautifully described.
And it's like super sad because he's literally searching for her
Yeah.
again. And
And
it's like,
knowing she's
oh,
in great danger.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, it was a really touching. It was really touching to get to see his side
It
of
was.
that story.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was very poignant. And then, so shifting back to Elide's perspective. So the promise, remember this horrible promise that we learned about, and it sort of seems almost
Mhm.
like a prophecy or destiny or whatever that can't be avoided. So we're kind of like, in Eli's perspective, we're reminded of this promise. And it's, we're reminded that all the characters, particularly the ones who are guided by the gods and goddesses, are just kind of pawns.
Mhm.
So this something we're kind of continually reminded through chapters 1 through 31 is that the promise of being an heir of Brannon, that they'll have to die in order to send the gods back to their world. So and I do believe we also kind of, I can't remember whose perspective it was from, whether it was Alide's or Aylin's, but there's this whole, if Aylin, it actually reminds me so much of Harry Potter. So, sorry, my thinking's a bit disjointed on this right now, but basically, like, Aylin has to essentially sacrifice herself. That's the deal.
Mhm.
Unless she, isn't able to or whatever. But then Dorian has to sacrifice himself, and it gives
Mhm.
very Harry Potter versus Neville Longbottom
Mm,
vibes, right? Like
yes,
it could have
yes.
been could have been
There's 2
Neville.
chosen ones, but then at
Yeah,
one point it switches so that there's just the one.
exactly. So
Mhm.
yeah.
No, you've said from the beginning that, well, not the beginning, but like from the point where there were like solid theories that we could build up to, they're like, this is giving very Harry Potter-ish. So I agree completely. And I think that it is excellent that Elide also points out, kind of in her own brain, she's thinking about this whole situation and she's upset about it. I'm like, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
some, like, obviously they're all like upset, but she's like, what is up with you, you like godlike creatures, whatever you are? This is your mess. Why are we cleaning it up? And I'm
Yeah,
like,
like
yes,
seriously. Yes.
finally, someone
Allied,
asking the hard questions.
right?
She's like, you deal with it.
A
Oh,
very, very relatable response.
mm-hmm. And like, I totally understand that Brennan made this promise or this deal with the god creatures so that he could get Erwin gone, like, so that he could remove Erwin from their world. But that was something like he made that deal. They
Mhm.
didn't, for one thing. And secondly, maybe there's another way for them to deal with Erewhon that doesn't require them to use the gods. So maybe the
Right.
gods
Yeah,
are
good
out of
point.
luck.
Yeah,
I mean, it still seems like obviously they're willing to go forward with the plan, so they obviously think that this is still the only way to get rid of him. But I
right.
mean, if you think about it, if they can get rid of him a different way, then they don't have to do the promise at all. I mean, there's nothing, they won't benefit from it at all. I don't know. We shall see.
Stupid gods.
They're not even
Leave
real
them
gods.
alone.
They're just aliens from another world who came in and infiltrated and like made themselves into gods in the eyes of the humans of that world.
So, like we mentioned, Aelin and Fenris are being held captive. And so Aelin has a dream about a white stag burning in a forest. And I think we should really discuss the symbolism of that.
Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure what that was alluding to. I'm not super big into symbolism, so I don't know what Sarah was trying to get the read. Like, I feel like it's super important, that scene, but I wasn't entirely sure what we were supposed to get out of it.
So, this is all just like kind of theories or whatever. But
Hmm.
the way I took it while I was reading it, and I might be completely wrong, is she's being tortured and all this stuff's happening and she's not really in control of the situation. Um, and the white stag is it's like Terrason's symbol essentially.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, actually, I was going to say, like, actually, I'm not sure because fire is also very symbolic to her. But the way that this was presented was maybe not like a good thing.
Yes, no, I think it was very damning. And it's like, is this also another one of Maeve's manipulations? Is
Hmm.
this a dream? Is this her seeing the future? Because we talked about,
Hmm.
sorry, we talked about in previous books that it almost seemed like she had a premonition where she was able to see the future. So is this something like that?
Yeah, but we're not really sure because we are also aware that we don't know what's real and we don't know what isn't with Aelin right
Mm-hmm.
now. So if it was a manipulation from Maeve, I feel like it was just a way to reduce Aelin's morale further,
Mm-hmm.
right? If not, then I don't know. But like it just doesn't sound good.
No, I think it is ominous for sure. And also something that we should remember because I feel like it's going to make sense. It's one of those things that are going to make sense later if
Yeah.
you take the time to think about it.
Yeah.
The last thing we sort of learn from this storyline early on is that the whole reason that Maeve has taken Aelin, and this might be super obvious to most people who are reading it, is that she wants Aelin to tell her where the keys are. What I found interesting was she actually wants Aelin to swear a blood oath to her. So the keys part, I totally understood that from the beginning, but I was like, oh, I didn't realize she wanted her to swear the blood oath. So,
Mm.
one, if she swears the blood oath, then she has to tell her where the keys are. So, check that box. But she also just wants Aelin to be under her control.
Yeah, that's scary because she's obviously just looking at Aelin like a weapon. And can
Mm-hmm.
you just imagine the damage that Aelin could do if she was under Maeve's control? So that's kind of scary. So
Mm-hmm.
we move on to Manon and the 13 in Dorian. And they're at the western edge of the White Fang Mountains, searching for the third word key. And they're looking for the Kraken Witches as well. And Dorian, like every day, he's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And like he's becoming quite a, I think, power level force to be
Mm-hmm.
reckoned with. So I think his character development has been very interesting throughout the series because he kind of
Mm-hmm.
went from just being like this kind of like prince that's kind of like partying and hates his dad, and then but then he's grown up so much since then, and particularly after Sorsha was murdered. But yeah, he's really changed, and I'm actually not too sure what to make of him now. Like I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I don't really know him anymore.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. One, seems a lot more powerful than the last time we saw him. And two, seems to just be a little reckless
Yeah,
and willing to do things that I don't think he would have been willing to do previously in
yeah,
order
he's
to kind of reach his end goal.
yeah, he's also become kind of ruthless as well, which is not something we saw from him at all before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing that he does early on is he summons Gavin. So this is something we've seen throughout the series: is the summoning of kind of ancient or ancestors. And he summons Gavin in order to find out where the third word key is. And I always thought it was very obvious where the third word key is, but apparently not. And we learned several things from this exchange. First, we learned that Gavin is incredibly selfish. He doesn't want them to succeed. He's like very reluctant to help because if they succeed, then Elena is gone. Like right now, she still kind of exists in that afterworld because she's able to exist there to help Aelin. However, when the promise is fulfilled, she's not like she doesn't get to stay there anymore. Her existence is kind of deleted, and that was her punishment. Is she doesn't
Mm-hmm.
get to stay in the afterworld with her family. And so Gavin doesn't want that, so he's like, mm-mm, mm-mm. And the next thing we learn is that the sword, Damaris, is able to tell the truth, which I think was alluded to earlier, but Dorian figures out how it works. If someone is being asked a question and they tell the truth, the sword gets warm. And if
Mm-hmm.
they're lying, it goes like ice cold.
Mm-hmm.
So just by like the temperature of the sword, he can tell whether somebody is being truthful or not, which is
Oh,
very
that's
helpful.
extremely helpful. That gives him a huge edge.
I like that sword.
Thank you. So glad you got it.
I did.
Yeah. And so Gavin is like telling Dorian Erwin could be defeated without sealing the gate, but he doesn't say how because he's extremely unhelpful. But I'm kind of wondering
Mhm.
if they're bound maybe magically and prevented from
Mm.
being able to reveal certain pieces of information because these
Maybe.
ghosts are like seriously not helpful. um, but he does tell him like the third key is in Morath.
Mhm. Which I
So,
thought was very obvious. Did
right?
anyone ever think it wasn't in Morath? Was there ever a point where it was
Where
anywhere
else would
else
it
but
be?
Morath? I'm like, is this only me? But anyways.
Oh my gosh. So Dorian plans to fulfill the promise. Manon's
Mhm.
like, you should fulfill the promise. I just
Yeah,
like,
I was surprised that she suggested
wow.
it because I was like, I kind of thought they were closer than they were. They seem to just be for benefits right now. I was going to say
Yeah.
friends with benefits, but I don't even know if they're friends. I feel
I,
like they're just benefits
they're
right
just
now.
using each other for
Yeah,
some
release.
release. Yeah. I do think there's something more there though.
Hmm. And
But yeah.
as the story, even the part of the story that we read progresses, we get more details on that. But at this point, it's like, oh, okay, no, they're just sleeping together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, all right then.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
fine.
And anyway, while all this is going on, we are then updated on Kaal, Irene, Nezrin, Sartak, and their allies and armies, and they're still sailing north, and they're currently kind of around Aderlin.
Hmm.
And Nezrin and Sartak and Falcon go scouting to determine, where they should go, essentially.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
so yeah,
And we kind of get an update. I think it might be in Nezrin's perspective as they're like flying or something. She's just thinking back on everything they've been through. And she's thinking about like the big reveal about Maeve. So if you didn't read Tower of Dawn and chose to skip it, then this will be your your information of, oh, Maeve is actually the
yeah.
Queen of the Valk,
By the way, and
by the way.
if you skip that reveal, I feel bad for you because it was
Because
epic.
this, yeah, it was epic in Tower of Dawn. This was very much like a, oh yeah, and Maeve is queen of
By
the
the
Valk,
way, right?
by the way.
Yeah.
Which it's good to get that reminder, but like it's not like the
The
epic
way
way
that
it
it
was
was
presented.
revealed, like even if you hate Kaal, okay, that book is worth reading simply for that reveal because
Mhm.
that's one of the best. And I feel like I keep saying that on this podcast. That's like one of the best reveals I've ever. There's been
Mhm.
some pretty good reveals in season one here. I feel in the books that we've been reading,
Yeah.
but whoa,
Yeah.
like I did not see that coming at
Hmm.
all. Maeve being
No.
Valg
And it was
did
just
not.
so
I was
nonchalantly said
shocked.
in this book.
I know
It's, yeah.
because the author is, Maz is assuming
Assumed you read it
you go
already.
read the series like she intended for you to.
Hmm. So it makes sense that it's nonchalant here. I just feel it's unfortunate for those people who chose to skip it because the reveal for them is not going to be this epic
Epic.
moment that it should have
No,
been.
no. But I think they're in the minority though. Like I think most people do read it,
Hmm.
whether they're Kaol haters or not.
Yeah.
But
And
anyway,
I did just speaking on that for a second because we're talking about it.
yeah,
I did read more about it, and people just think he's boring. They don't actually hate him, or at least that's what I read. Is like I specifically read a post, and then I was like, oh, I want to read the thread of this post because it was about like, oh, don't skip Tower of Dawn. Kale's not that bad was essentially the post, and then so I was like, oh, I want to read the comments to see what people say,
yeah,
and like you're getting the back and forth, and everyone's like, we don't hate him. He's just boring. He's just like a human in a fantasy world. He's just boring. And I'm like, okay, I guess I can give you that. Like, he's not as exciting as the other characters in the story, but I still think he has a lot of value in this story if you're willing to give him a shot.
yeah.
But the last big news that we get, sort of getting us up to date with all the characters, is Irene's pregnant.
Yeah. what this is not like, okay, when I read that, I was kind of like, oh no, because this is a
No.
very bad time to get pregnant, Irene. And like she
Hmm.
of all people would know how to like take a contraceptive potion or whatever it is that they use. Feel like it is
Yeah.
a contraceptive,
Hmm. Potion. Yeah.
yeah, potion. So what is she doing? What's she
What is
doing?
she doing?
It's like she's like in the middle of a war. Oh
Hmm.
my gosh, this is just bad timing. So it just ups the
Yeah.
stakes that
It
much
it
more.
certainly does.
So now that we're caught up on each of the characters' locations and all the major kind of plot points, like a little mini synopsis overview, at least from, chapters 1 to 6-ish, right?
Hmm.
So now we're going to go through chapters 7 to 31, focusing on one group's perspective at a time. And we're going to start with Dorian and Manon. So this I thought was like super unexpected.
Hmm.
A Stygian spider disguised as a bear. Okay, so like this is unexpected, right? Attacks Manon. And I
Hmm.
was so grossed out. Oh my God. It actually makes me feel itchy thinking about it. I was so
Hmm.
grossed out by the visual of this spider coming out of the bear. I was like, what is happening here? And then it's made clear that it shifted back into the spider.
Hmm.
Oh, that was just like a really nasty visual.
Yeah. And very unexpected.
Yes.
And this is the spider that Manon stole the spider silk from. We also
Hmm.
find out this is the spider that Falcon traded his life force for the silk. So
Yeah.
in trading the silk, she like got his power.
Yeah, she like so like I don't know if it's because he's a shifter or not, but while doing that magical kind of agreement, she managed
Hmm.
to steal a kernel of power from him. I don't doesn't sound like it was intentional. It sounds like it just kind of happened, but I'm not
Oh,
sure.
okay.
But her name is Cyrene, by the
Hmm.
way. And so yeah, so now she can shift to whatever form she pleases, and she seems to be pretty good at it. But I guess like the spiders are pretty powerful, hey? So
Yeah.
that must be kind of like why.
Yeah. And I was wondering if because she took some of his power, because in Tower of Dawn, we kind of learn that he's not a very skilled shifter, Falcon. And I don't know if it was because he hasn't been shifting very long, because he didn't get his powers until after, like he didn't have them before
Hmm.
the power was taken. I think he kind of came into his powers later in life, if I'm remembering this correctly. So I don't think he's had much time to practice. But also, I'm wondering if maybe, and so he can't go into super, super big animals like Lysandra can. Like, Lysandra can turn into a wyvern, she can turn into a sea dragon. Like,
Yeah.
she can turn into these massive creatures.
Yeah.
Whereas he could only get as big as like a wolf or something, like a large wolf.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it's because the spider had some of his power, like if like by her taking it, it kind of made it lesser for
That
him.
I think makes good sense because Lysandra's obviously a very powerful shifter. And
Hmm.
they're of the same bloodline from what we understand. So I'm just thinking, okay, so because Cyrene took this kernel of power, did it kind of maybe just dilute his powers a little bit? He can't
Hmm.
obviously access them because he's sharing them with someone else. And does that what does that mean like in the future? But what I find also very interesting is Cyrene seems to have like a pretty good handle on shifting. Uh,
Hmm.
and she's only got a little bit of his power. So I just find that kind of
But
interesting
yeah, is that because of her innate power
as
as
a
the spider?
Stygian spider. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's kind of
But
what I'm thinking.
we
So
just don't know enough about the biology of these creatures.
no, we don't. And so Manon obviously wants to kill it.
Hmm.
Uh, but Dorian convinces her to keep Cyrene alive, and it's like hinted it's because he wants to learn how to shift so he can
Hmm.
sneak into Morath.
Yeah, so he's got this sneaky plan. And the spider also says that she knows where the Kraken witches are. Like she knows that that's who they're looking for, and says that she can take them there. And Dorian, having the sword, who that lets him know if truth is being told, knows she does actually know where these Kraken witches are. So he's like, she's telling the truth. I promise she's telling the truth. She can take us to them. And that is what kind of convinces Manon, because she wants to find the Kraken witches.
Yeah.
And this seems to be a good way for her to be able to do that. And the spider holds up her deal. Our Cyrene does take them to a group of Kraken witches. Obviously, it's not all of them, but a coven of witches. And the head of this particular coven turns out to be Manon's great-grandmother, but not from the royal side of the family, from like another branch of the family. And her name is Glennis. And so we meet her. And another thing that Manon does secretly before they actually go and meet up with the Kraken witches is she lures some of the yellow legs to where the Kraken witches are, like kind of has them follow her. And then the yellow legs obviously attack them. And Manon sort of saves the day, or her and the 13 end up saving the day with the help of Dorian.
So Dorian is, once he finds out that this was a plan, he is astonished at Manon's ruthlessness, because some Krakens did die. So yeah, that was a pretty intense move. But Manon, I think she even mentions this, that like what she knows how to do is war and battle. And so in order to gain their trust, she did what she knows best, which is war and battle.
Yeah, it was a very sneaky move, but I understand why she did it. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with her methods, but it's very in character.
Yeah.
And so I respect that.
Yeah, totally.
I like when characters stay in character.
Yes. It's very consistent. But so Dorian, he kind of learns a little bit about shifting from the spider. I honestly thought what Cyrene had to say was very useless, but I was like, just be what you want to be. Oh, thanks. Like, didn't think of that.
I think he gets more from her, from like digging into her magically.
Yeah, absolutely. So once he's gotten what he needs from her, he kills her. And yeah, so this brings the question, like, now that Cyrene is dead, will Falcon be young again? Will he, will that power that she had go back to him? And like, I'm just wondering, like, if the Stygian spider does one of these life deals with people, like as they had been doing, does that person have to kill the spider, or does the spider just need to die in general?
I always believed the spider just needed to die in general. So I feel like he is going to be young, but it's like, is it just like instantaneous as soon as she dies? Like he's going to shift back into his human form and be 20 years younger?
Yeah.
So I can't wait to go back or get to the next chapter that has him in it to see where he's at.
Is there any difference? Yeah. And he also, Dorian, that is, he also discovers that the Stygian spiders are Valk.
And I'm a little disappointed in his reaction to this. He just like doesn't care. He doesn't care to learn anymore. He doesn't question her. He's just like, oh, they're Valk born. Interesting. And kills her. I'm like, dude, you could have gotten so much more information. This isn't all about you.
Yeah, Dorian, I feel like he's just gotten to a place where he just doesn't care.
Yeah, it's that recklessness. He does start practicing his shifting magic, and he's not having much luck with it. He's like sitting around the fire with some of the other 13. I can't remember who it was exactly who was sitting with, and he's like, are my eyes a different color? And they're like, no. Like, why are you wasting your time and energy on this? But finally, after having a bit of a kind of heartfelt moment, not like heartfelt's not quite the right word, but like he sort of opens himself up to Manon a little bit. And in opening up, he is then able to change his eye color. So it seems to be more than just like will it into being. It seems like there's like I don't know, more going on.
I think that it has something to do with his own kind of beliefs about himself. And I feel like maybe he needs, because the Stygian spider, she was very good at shifting, but she was also very honest about to herself about what she was.
Mm.
And I think Dorian is going through some pretty internal, pretty intense internal struggles, especially regarding his identity. So I think that that probably has a lot to do with his
Mm.
troubles that he's having with shifting. Because I think just having read this, the probably key to being able to shift is making peace with who you are.
Oh, this is like making me think about like Kale and how he couldn't heal until he made peace
Hmm.
with his past. So
Yeah.
maybe it's like the same kind of psychological block
Hmm.
happening with Dorian.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Brilliant.
Ah. And so Minon and the 13, so they find out the Krakens are going south to Elway, and they decide to go with them, even though Minon has this, like, she's like, no, we need to go north. But they agree to go south with the Krakens. And the Krakens hate Minon, right? I mean,
Hmm.
understandable. She's been hunting them for centuries. But it's interesting because one of the Kraken witches is standing there watching the wyverns, and Abraxas and Asterin's mare are like
Hmm.
snuggling, and the Kraken's like, they're mated. And they're like, what?
Obviously.
What? Like, they're just so like, huh? And I'm like, man, you guys so unobservant. Like, because they're just so focused on their sort of military ways, you know? And then
Hmm.
this Kraken is like, yeah, they're capable of love. Like, these creatures are capable of love despite having been created by Erewhon.
Hmm.
And so I just find that so interesting that Erewhon could create something that was capable of love,
Yeah.
which brings, I think, into question a lot of sort of um, ethical stuff, because you can't just be going around killing things. Well, they're created by Erewhon, so they're inherently evil. They may not be, as demonstrated by the wyverns.
And I think maybe it also demonstrates to them that just because they are partially Valg doesn't mean that they are evil and
Yeah,
can't have love, which is something that
exactly.
Astrid has obviously already kind of discovered on her own, and Manon is sort
Yeah.
of in the process of discovering.
Yeah, she
But
realizes it to a certain extent, because like when we
mhm,
think about when we first met her and where she is now, like she's compared to when we first met her, she's become a big old softie.
yes, yeah.
So on page 225, the wind keeps kind of singing to Manon, hurry northward, and day and night, hurry Blackbeak. And I'm a little concerned about this because they're not going north, they're going south.
No.
And so I'm just a little concerned that something bad's going to happen to them.
Oh, that is so interesting. I did not pick up on that at all. I was like, oh,
It
they
might
need to
be
go
nothing.
south.
Yeah, no, it might be nothing. But I just got a bad feeling, and I was like, uh
Ooh.
oh.
Well, we shall see. Because, yeah, something's going to go down in the south, but I was hoping it was going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
So we kind of alluded to this a bit that Dorian and Manon's relationship is progressing, but at a different pace than I initially thought. Like I thought that they were already at a place where they were more like starting a relationship, but then
Hmm.
at the very beginning of the book, we see like no, it's they're not really in a relationship of any sort other than
Hmm.
physically. And then as we get to kind of the end of where we stopped reading, we see that Dorian actually confesses he does care about her. And it's like, this is a big thing. I'm like, oh, I thought they kind of already like established that between each other. But no, like this is him like really opening up to her, being like, I actually care about you. And it's like
Yeah.
kind of a big deal. And I think at first she's like trying to shut it down, but I feel like she won't be able to for too much longer.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I think this is going in regards to the relationship. In regards to the whole troop, I thought like positive things were going to come out of the South, but now you have me second guessing.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope I'm wrong. Because I don't want to be right about this.
I mean, it'd make it probably be more interesting if things go south. But next up, we have Kale, Irene, Nezrin, and Sartak. We'll go through kind of what we learn about them and how their storyline has progressed. While scouting, it was discovered that Erewhon is actually sending forces to Aniel, which is where Kale is from and where his family is. And the reason for this is that Kale's father refused to bend the knee, to take a Game of Thrones reference. And yeah, so Erewhon's like, okay, you're not going to follow me, then I will simply get rid of you. I will just destroy your town and you and everyone in it.
No.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
that's really sad.
Yeah, it really is. But
it's like chapter 10 or something, and we're already getting like Morath marching in Terrasen, Morath marching to Aniel. Like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's fast paced, it's hardcore.
Yeah.
So the group, which, Sartak and the Rook and everybody from Antica, I guess, they decide to help in Aniel and then move north inland to meet with the forces of Terrasen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good plan, that they're like,
Yeah.
we'll do this little side quest, which will ultimately help because taking out any of Morath's armies is a win.
Yes.
And then we'll kind of meet up with the people who we were trying to meet up with anyways.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, because they're going to be near Morath, because Aniel is quite near like Morath, Farron Gap. Is that what it's called?
Farrion Gap, yeah.
Farrion Gap. Mm-hmm. That area. And we know that Dorian's kind of ultimate plan is he's going to try and get to Morath to get the third key. I'm wondering if those timelines are going to kind of merge and we'll see Kale and Dorian reunited.
Yeah. Oh, that would be so cool because they haven't seen each other in ages.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like besties. So
yeah, it'd be cool to get that little gang back together.
It would. And I mean, Kale's married now. He's got to introduce his wife to Dorian. Like, I know they're in the middle of war and it's sort of like the least of their concerns, but like, I want to see that happen,
Yeah. And Kale and Irene end up flying to Aniel via Rook and kind of warn Kale's dad, like, this is coming, because they have no idea if he's even aware. He is aware, but like, he's not being very proactive about the situation. And in Tower of Dawn, we suspected that Kale's dad might have actually been acting kind of ruthlessly and wanting Kale to return home as protection for him. Like he knew something fishy was going on, and maybe this whole time he was actually just trying to protect him.
Yeah.
And we do find out that is true. However, it's completely selfish reasons. It has nothing to do with actually protecting Kale. It has to do with protecting the Lord Westfall name, and that if something were to happen to him, he wanted Kale to be there to kind of like take his place.
Yeah, it was more about securing the future for his lineage than it was about caring for his son.
Yeah, which was really disappointing.
So we finally, we kind of have before, but this is like, we've heard about Lord Westfall and everything, but we finally actually get to meet him. And he's just as much of a jerk as we are given to believe.
Yeah.
He's like, so he's really cheap. So his whole keep is like falling into disrepair. It looks run down and shabby. And Kale is actually embarrassed of the state of it, because looking where Irene comes from, well, not from like Fenharrow, but in Antica, and everything is very opulent and luxurious in Antica. And then he's, brings him to this, it's basically a hovel compared to what Irene has become used to. And in my mind, I was envisioning it to be quite dark and dank and shabby and cold and just awful.
Yeah.
And
it's almost like giving, that tiny little room that they stuck Selena / Aelin in when she was in Mistward. It's like kind of giving those vibes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And anyways, he's such a jerk. Lord Westfall is such a jerk to both Irene and Kale. And Irene is a little spitfire, so she stands up for herself and for Kaol, and she's basically telling him, I will not tolerate this level of disrespect from you, kind of thing. And you can
Mm-hmm.
tell that Lord Westfall is kind of like grudgingly respecting her for being so assertive, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Um, and but anyway, so Kaol is basically like, well, we're here to just warn you that like Morath is marching on you. And so his dad's like, oh, okay, I guess I'll prepare the city. But it's like this whole exchange, you just have to read it because geez.
Yeah. It's very telling of his character, and it's like you kind of feel like, oh wow, Kale's like really upstanding considering where he came from.
Well, and not to mention, like his dad threw him down the stairs as a child.
Mm-hmm. That's just like
This guy is a piece of
unacceptable.
garbage. Who throws a child down the stairs?
Mm-hmm. Like just
Like, what?
it's like no one in this story can have a happy life. Like literally no one.
No. I'm just, when I read that part, I was like, wow. I had just no words. I was so like angry on Kale's behalf.
Mm-hmm. One other thing we kind of learn about in this scene, or shortly after, is that there is a dam just up kind of above Aniel or near Aniel. And they like had in the past talked about like releasing the dam to give like more water, but they realized that in releasing it, it would just let out so much water so quickly that it would kind of like
Yes.
destroy the city. And
Yeah.
like again, I feel like this is being mentioned for a reason. I'm seeing like this coming into play in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of like a battle. Things are going wrong, so like,
Yeah. Or I almost wonder if Aniel will be overtaken by the Valg, and so they release the dam to kill them all.
ooh, that's better. Yeah,
Guess we will see. We'll
we
find
shall
out.
see.
But yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking like this dam is sounds like it's got a bad design because like shouldn't it be designed so they can let little bits of water out when they need to? Like,
You would think so.
my goodness. So I think it will definitely come into play down the line because obviously Maas does not mention details offhandedly, and that is I feel could have a huge impact. Like hopefully it's not used against them, but who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what if they march on
No.
Aniel and they don't even fight, they just release the dam and drown everybody,
I never even thought it could be used against them. Oh no.
right?
This is like, now this puts like a whole nother level of anxiety.
Right, so many different
No.
things to consider because like strategically if the Valk don't care about retaining any human life, that would be what to do
Mm-hmm.
if they don't care
Yeah.
about like using it as a stronghold.
Yeah, if they know about it.
Yeah. Kaol ends up telling Irene because she's like kind of like it's bewildering because it's like the place looks like it's poor, but he ends up like telling her like it's not. We've actually got like loads of treasure here, but it's hidden. And Aniel is actually super rich, but his father doesn't like to spend his money on, I guess, upkeep of the place,
Mm-hmm.
or he's not going to waste quote unquote money on like decorations. It sounds
Mm-hmm.
like he's very much like, is it necessary? If not, we don't need it, kind of thing.
Yeah, if
But
it's not completely broken, then don't fix
mhm.
it. Like if it's a little broken, that's okay.
It's still functional. Like as
Yeah.
an example, the room that they assigned to Kale was not the room he grew up in. It was like
Mm-hmm.
reserved for guests. And it's so like the sink is described to be all rusty and it's
Mm-hmm.
tiny and Kale's embarrassed. And I was so like PO'd on his behalf because I was kind of like how dare his like he it just regardless of Kale's past decisions, this is his son and he's still like kind of like he's the eldest son too, so he's technically still the heir of Aniel, and he's
Mm-hmm.
given this tiny little crappy room. Anyway, like whatever. In the large scheme of things, it doesn't matter. But I just thought, like, it's just another demonstration of his father's crappiness. But anyway, so I was kind of curious, like, what's he saving all this treasure for? Like, if they're quite rich, like, what are they saving the treasure? I'm just curious, like, oh,
Hmm.
funding for war. Well, war is upon them, and the treasure sits uselessly hidden away.
I think it's just like a one of those characters that represents people who have money to have money.
It's hoarding
Like
his
they
wealth.
yeah, they just hoard their wealth because to know that you have a certain amount makes you feel powerful. And I think that's kind of where it is. He's just the kind of person who likes to know he has a certain amount of wealth and can kind of like hold that over people's heads.
Oh, that sort of fits with his character. So, and then meanwhile, Nezrin and Sartak, they arrive and with the Rook soldiers and the rest of the Rookin's foot soldiers, they're on their way. But the Rook who fly, they settle. It's like, sounds pretty impressive. They like settle into like very organized, like rows and everything. And I'm like, wow,
Hmm.
this would make such a great like show series.
Yes. And like we're bound to get some Wavern on Rook action happening in this battle. I feel like it would be a letdown if we didn't
I'm
because
wondering,
we are
like,
so close to the
I'm
witches.
scared for the Rook because the
Mhm.
wyverns they're basically dragons without front legs, right? So it's kind of like, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we're supposed to like believe that even though the Rook are like essentially large eagles, like they're supposed to be like super vicious. Like I bet their talons are like brutal. Their talons
Yeah.
could probably just like decimate
Yeah.
a wyvern's like throat area.
Yeah, exactly. Just, and that's it
Yeah.
for the wyvern. Yeah, that would make
So I
sense.
think they will. I think Sarah has written them in such a way that they are supposed to be equally as strong. Like
Yeah.
they're fighting equals,
Yeah,
is
that
my
makes
hope. Because yeah,
sense.
if it's just like one is way more powerful than the other, then that's just sad.
Yeah. And I mean, I think in Tower of Dawn, it was made pretty clear the Rook Riders are sort of like legendary. So,
Well, yeah, and they
yeah.
battle too. Like,
Yeah.
well, and the witches do as well. So it'll be like the people battling on top, and then that. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it can be pretty epic if it's
Intense.
done well.
Yeah. So moving on to Aedion, Lysandra, and like their allies and armies and stuff. So they end up winning the battle against there's some Valk foot soldiers that they are fighting. But it's clear that it's just Erwin trying to just kind of wear them down, and which is like, oh
Mhm.
my goodness.
What is to come?
Yeah.
As we mentioned before, Terrasen is still being ruled by the lords. So
Mhm.
after they end up winning this battle with Morath, because it was, it was just like a piddly little thing to
Yeah.
get intel or whatever, wear them down. After that, Darrow actually calls them back
Hmm.
to kind of just further back north towards the capital,
Yeah.
and they have to listen because it's like a democracy, yeah. And they fall back, and the Darrow would like the lords to return to Ornth and kind of just like secure the city. And it's like the dam with her, like, be down to the rest of Terrasen, like, we'll just secure the city and make sure
Yeah.
no one gets through and kind of more of siege. And Aedion's like, no, we need to take them south to the borders and we need to protect our borders.
Hmm.
And so they have to meet Darrow where he's camped in order to like have a discussion about what are they going to do.
Darrow's the worst. I hate that
He's
guy.
like ruining this. He's like
Yeah.
making this so much more difficult than it needs to be.
Yeah. He's just the worst. And then we've also got this tension between Lysandra and Aedion continuing, but she tries to speak to him. I think she
Mm-hmm.
kind of loves him, and
Yeah.
she's like, like, because he's like just doubting everything between them. So she's like, no, like it was real for me kind of thing. But,
Mhm.
I'm doing this for Aelin and I would do it again.
Yeah.
And Aedion's like, like,
And
it's
but
just,
like if the roles were reversed, he would too, which
I
is the
know.
frustrating thing. It's like I understand completely why he's hurt, but he would do the same thing in her position, 100% without question.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a little unfair that he's still mad at her. Like I can understand being mad at first, but like I feel like he's kind of needs to get over it because
Yeah.
Lysandra's amazing.
Yeah. She is. She's incredible. She's like my favorite character. But so they're having this like meeting, right?
Hmm. Yeah, they have to meet to decide, like essentially vote. So they go have a back and forth about like, oh, we should do this because we should do this because, and then they vote at the end. However, more lords are on Darrow's side still. If
Mm-hmm.
Alide was there and Aelin were, well, I guess Aelin is there in Lysandra form, but if Alide was there, I think they
Mm-hmm.
would, like, she would be a tiebreaker kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But because she's not there, then the lords who are backing Darrow have more votes at this point
Yeah.
in time. So they vote to have the Bane and then therefore all the allies, because they just follow the Bane where they go, to return to the capital and just set up for a siege.
Yeah.
And that's disappointing.
Extremely. But during this meeting, there's a little surprise visitor.
I know, I so love this. So we see Knox, and we kind of saw him a little bit earlier in the story, and he has been a spy for Terrasen the whole time. So for those who don't remember, Knox is one of the individuals who were like fighting in the championships in Throne of Glass. So that
Mm-hmm.
first big championship to become King's champion, he was like Selena's biggest ally. I think
Mm-hmm.
he the one who like knew about all about poisons and stuff.
I think so. Yeah.
It turns out he has been a Terrasen spy the entire time. And the person he was kind of like the spy for has since passed. So now he, I believe, works for Darrow. And he comes into the tent and he sees Miss Lysandra dressed in Aelin's skin
Yeah.
and is like, "Oh, I recognize you, girl."
Yeah.
And we're like, "Oh my goodness,
Oh.
nail biting." I was just like, "This is it. This is it. We're done. We're done. The whole plan. It's over."
Yeah. Yeah. But then kind of like simultaneously, I feel like a Valg
Yeah.
shows up.
Yeah, he lets the Valg in, like, because it's this messenger, but he doesn't
Right.
realize it's a Valg. He's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
there's a messenger here." He's like the person letting them in.
Yeah.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, it's just crazy,
It's
actually.
so crazy. The Valg, like, can sense it's not Aelin as
Yeah.
well. So now
Yeah.
there's two people
Yeah.
who
Oh
know that
no.
Lysandra is not Aelin, and the Valg is like about to say something. And he like sends this sort of like magical message to
Yeah.
Erewhon.
His eyes go all black, and it's like him telepathically speaking to Erewhon, and they're like,
It's so creepy.
yeah. Oh
And
my
as he's
gosh.
about to like verbally say what's going on, Lysandra's like, "Kill him!"
Yeah.
And so he gets, I don't know, beheaded
They
or
have like a
something.
they have like a fight though,
Yeah.
because he attacks, and this was nerve wracking because it's like Aelin would just incinerate his ass, right?
Mhm.
But that's not Aelin.
Yeah. She can't. Lysandra
So
doesn't have Aelin's powers.
yeah, and I'm just like, wouldn't the lords be like, why didn't you just kill him yourself? Like, why are you? So, but
Well, this whole
anyway,
time it's like, it's been 2 months. Why have you not used your powers once?
yeah, it's kind of
It's,
yeah, it feels like it's getting close to people finding out for sure, kind of thing. So
mhm,
now Erewhon knows that Aelin is not in Terrasen. He
mhm.
knows it's an imposter. So this is like not good because obviously that leaves Terrasen very like vulnerable without even the threat of the Firebringer there, right?
Yeah.
Um, but he spoke to Lysandra. So Nox is very perceptive and he notices like he was a very formidable competitor in the Championship, right? And
Mhm.
that is for a reason. And I'd like to believe that it's because he's also an assassin. So he's very, like, he just notices details. and he would have been studying all of his competitors in Throne of Glass and really getting to know them, like probably looking for tells and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So he's able to tell that Lysandra is not Aelin. And he kind of calls her out on it. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I am Aelin. But
Mm-hmm.
he knows she's not, regardless of what she says, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, Aedion, meanwhile, is like, this is an unacceptable course of action, referring back to Darrow's plan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and basically, what ends up happening, they end up spiking some wine and making
Mm-hmm.
sure all these guys drink it, and then they fall asleep, and then Aedion's like, I'm taking my bane and we are going to do what I think is the correct thing to do. And he
Yeah.
basically like leaves Darrow and his other, I guess, commanders there just like unconscious, and when they wake
Mm-hmm.
up, the whole army is gone and they're just
Yeah.
like left there alone in the snow.
Yeah, that was a badass move. And I think because like Nox says to Lysander, like, I know who you are. I'm not going to say anything. Selena Aelin was my friend. And because he's the like master of poisons, I think he helps them
Yeah.
to knock everyone out, but like not
Yeah.
enough that it's going to harm them. So I think
No.
his skills come in handy with helping
Yeah.
them with their plan.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it would have been helpful for them all to be assassinated at this point, because it's like they are, they don't see Aelin as queen, but yeah, obviously that could cause some serious problems back in Terrasen. So
Yeah, I think
or
it's
in
best that they
Terrasen.
just leave him unconscious. But Lysandra turns back into Lysandra, and like Aelin just disappears for a little bit, and she's scouting. And so she flies ahead quite a ways ahead and sees a massive army. Like the army that they fought before was just like a tiny little baby army. This one is huge, 50,000 troops, because Ren taught her how to like properly count armies. 50,000 troops, flying Ilkin, as well as 5 Velk princes
Oh
are
boy.
coming straight for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they meet.
Yeah.
And it's disastrous.
Yes.
So where we left off, they were in the middle of this fight and being destroyed.
Yeah. Wolf tribe, where are you?
Yes, maybe this is where the wolf tribe comes in, because like I don't understand how they're getting out of this. I haven't read any further. Like this is where I have stopped in their storyline. I have
Yeah.
no idea how they're getting out of this. I'm assuming they have to get out of it. They're not just going to wipe out all of her allies before she even gets back to them. Like,
What if they do?
what if they do? That would suck. I don't think I would like that.
Well, I've heard this is a real gut-wrenching read.
I feel like that's too many people to wipe out. Like, obviously, even if they get destroyed, not everyone's going to die. But I think they will lose a significant portion of their armies and their allies and all that. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a huge hit, but I do think like our key players will survive this one. Maybe we'll lose like some kind of like Ren or somebody who's like important but not like key, if that makes sense. I feel bad saying that about him, but like it's like we like him, but like he's not one of the main characters.
We'll be like, oh, that sucks, but yeah. Yeah.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm worried for this group. This one for me wasn't the most exciting storyline up until this point, but I feel like they're like the backbone of the story. Like they're holding the fort down and kind of taking all the hits.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot more to come from them.
I
So
agree.
I don't think they're going to be completely wiped out.
I completely agree. I was a bit bored by this storyline, although it's very necessary. But coming from other storylines where, this storyline is more like positioning armies and like tactical war stuff. And then and anyway, it's not my most favorite thing to read about, but it's very important, obviously.
Yeah, it's the grueling reality of war, but not what we came to the fantasy book for.
Right.
Moving on to Rowan, Gabriel, Lorcan, and Allied story, and kind of picking up where we left off from the beginning. they are given to, so they've been hunting down people to try and gather information. And at this point, they kind of have two options of where to go. They're given conflicting information about where they might find Maeve and therefore Aelin. Option one, go to Doranel. They're not very close to Doranel. They're like a week or something out, or 2 weeks maybe. Like they're far away from Doranel. The second one is some sort of like desert city. I think they give us the name. I'm not 100% sure, but they're very close to this city. That was like the second option. Allied votes Doranel. She was told by her little god to like really listen to like the person who they were getting information from. And she gets the sense that Aelin is in Doranel. Like that's what her gut's telling her. And we know that Allied's gut is like to be trusted. Lorcan votes, we're really close to this other city. It'll be 3 days. Let's pop in, check it out, get some more information. And if not, then we can go to Doranel. And just from a strategic point of view, they decide that that is the better option. So Rowan decides to go check out this desert city. So they go.
I was so annoyed by that because like they just ignore Allied. And she literally has like a goddess speaking to her. And I think she even tells them, like, the goddess said this. And they're like, let's go to this desert city. And I'm like, why are you ignoring her? And then she turned out to be right. And like, seriously,
So disappointing.
I'm really annoyed on her behalf here. So they end up kind of, as they're heading in the wrong direction, Rowan feels a pulse of Aelin's power. And then he's like, oh, she's in Doranel. It's like, yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And anyway, so then they're like, well, we need to figure out a plan to draw Maeve away from Doranel, away from Aelin, right? Or whatever. Anyway, I was just so frustrated by that whole thing that they wouldn't listen to Allied.
I know. It's like, why did you bring her if you're not even going
Right?
to listen? I mean, I don't think they had a choice. I think she's just like,
I'm coming.
told the witches to drop her off and was like, I'm coming.
Yeah.
So they were kind of stuck with her, but like for a reason. She's there for a reason.
She's such a fighter.
She is. And she kind of is like their little gopher, like, because everyone knows who they are. So like she has to basically do everything. Yeah, so it's like she's the one who ultimately like sets up this plan to lure Maeve away, and she's the one who agrees to go into the city. So they get to the outskirts of Doranel. It is surrounded by armies.
Yep.
Because Maeve has set up a protection against the city. And Allied decides to sneak into the city to get information on if Maeve has truly left and on where Karen is. Because obviously they know that Aelin is going to be with Karen if Maeve has left the city.
Yes.
So she's like a little force and just tots right in there.
Yeah, she's very good at acting. And she ends up meeting SR, which is, she finds out that she was a previous lover of Lorcan's. And when she first sees SR, she is like, she calls her a dark-haired beauty. She's just like stunningly beautiful. And when she realizes that she's one of like Lorcan's past lover, she's kind of like, you can like sense that she's like, how could he go from this to me kind of thing.
Feeling a little self-conscious.
It's kind of sad. And anyways, so like also she's Fae, obviously. She's in Doranel, right? And you know, Fae are very just innately graceful and everything. So yeah, Lilide is feeling some insecurities, but she's pretty focused on her task. It's sort of like a side note in her mind, feels like. So SR and this other female Fae, they're kind of like standing in this group, and clearly like Elide is watching them, and she sees the other female Faes must be like their commanding officer or something. Like she's clearly like the lead of the group. Anyway, so she kind of creates this plan to like play like Karen's scorned lover, like, oh, I was supposed to meet him here. Where is he? Oh, I'm all sad that he ghosted me, basically. But anyways, her plan kind of like works in a way that she didn't really expect. She's like, oh, I'm going to go try somewhere else. So she's like looking at her little compact mirror in an alleyway, and then SR sneaks up behind her and she's like, "What are you
Mm-hmm.
doing?" kind of thing. And then they end up finding out that they're kind of like on the same side of things. So SR and her sister give Alide like all the information that she needs. So Alide sneaks back out and goes back to the boys and lets them know that Karen is in the eastern camp. And so they're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, wherever Karen is, Aylin's probably going to be there too. So they make a plan to attack at dawn the next morning.
Yeah. So just before dawn, Rowan ends up getting kind of like the voice of Mala in him. And I don't think he often hears Mala, but because she is like Aylin's protector, she's like, go now. And he's like trying to kind of fight it because he's like, they set up this plan and he likes to stick to plans, I think. He's the kind of person. But he's like, no, I can't ignore this. I need to go. So he chooses to trust in this voice of Mala and starts to like enact the plan. He doesn't necessarily change the plan, he just starts it early.
Yeah.
So he's going to go to the camp, and then once he has either Aylin or Karen, because if Aylin's not there, then the plan is to get Karen to torture him for information. Once he has his target, then he's going to send a pulse to Lorcan and Gabriel to create a diversion so he can get his target out. So he's heading in towards the like tent that he thinks is going to house the person he's looking for, and Gabriel and Lorcan are waiting on the outskirts to
For
create
his
this
signal.
diversion.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we end off their storyline for now.
Mm-hmm. So now we're switching over to Aylin and Fenris' point of view. So kind of like rewinding a bit. So Aylin and Fenris are brought to Maeve, and it's interesting because so she's unable to like she's in a very compromised position. She's got like this horrible iron mask on. She's like, is she in the sort of iron coffin at this point?
I
Or
think right now when she's being brought to Maeve, like she's walking to
walking
Maeve.
in her
So she's not in.
shackles,
She's
maybe?
like
Okay.
kept in this
Yeah,
the coffin when she's not being tortured,
right.
essentially. I
And
laugh
she's not being
for my
actively
self-preservation.
tortured.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So it was kind of a throwback to Throne of Glass. If you remember in Dovier, she would be blindfolded and then be walking through the mines, but she would count her steps and keep like track of the turns they made and kind of be mapping things out in her mind because she's brilliant. So she's doing the same thing here, and that was a nice callback.
This is completely not to do with this particular storyline, but every time Maeve is mentioned, it also mentions like an owl by her. And this
Mm-hmm.
goes all the way back to the first meeting in Air of Fire. And I can't remember if we know who the owl is. Like, is the owl a healer that she keeps next to her? Or
Oh.
is it just an owl? Like, I don't remember if we know this information. And
Oh.
it just kept popping up. And like every time the owl came up, I was like, who's this owl?
Yeah.
And I couldn't
We need
remember.
to, I'm sure we'll find out because it's being mentioned aggressively in the story.
Aggressively. So, and yeah, in this scene, it's mentioned again. And it just reminded me, I like needed to ask you, do you know? But no, we'll have
Yeah.
to wait and see.
So Fenris has a brother, and his name is, I guess, Connell. I'm guessing at that pronunciation, but um, so the reason Fenris has a blood oath in the first place with Maeve was to, I think, protect his brother from it.
Yeah.
But he ends up confronting Fenris. So this was like Aelin was brought to Maeve, and Fenris was brought to Maeve, and like she's got Connell there, and he basically like tells Fenris like he's disappointed in him, and then
Mm-hmm.
Maeve like forces Connell to take his own life in front of Fenris and Aelin. Like it was cruel and unusual torture to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
Like just brutal because there's nothing they can do. Like Fenris is sworn to his blood oath that he can't do anything except for stand there and watch his brother die, basically.
Yeah. It
Oh
was
my
so
gosh.
disturbing.
It was.
And it's like the most horrific thing she could do because she knew that Fenris would rather like his life be taken. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like way more of a punishment is to like have like, because that's like the whole thing. Like he went there to save his brother. He wanted to protect him. And then she forces him to witness his brother's death at his own hands. Like, oh my goodness. This woman has like the like perfect ability to inflict the most pain possible.
Yes. Yeah, she goes for their vulnerabilities for sure.
And so Aylin's like being forced to kneel in this dragon glass, which is cutting her knees up. So this whole interaction that they are going through. And she takes the opportunity to try and attack Karen and Maeve. So she takes the glass and she like gets in a few punches of Karen and he's kind of down for a second. And then she takes one of the glass pieces and cuts Maeve. And by then Karen has kind of secured her again. But she looks at Maeve and sees she's cut her cheek and black blood is dripping out of the wound.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, at this point, we know she's Valg, but Aylin doesn't. She hasn't gotten that information. And because, like, instantly it turns to red, like, pretty, not instantly, but like within seconds it turns to red. And Aylin's like, oh, like, am I just like seeing
She's
things? Like, she doesn't
questioning
trust.
everything. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because of all of the manipulations Maeve has been placing on her, and she isn't sure what is reality and what isn't. So, although she's like, she saw the black blood, she's like, wait, is that real? Or like, yeah, it's
Mhm.
crazy.
It's just like she can't get past this, like she's.
And then Maeve tells Aelin that spies have seen Aelin and Rowan and Terrasin. This is a huge blow to Aylin's morale because
Mhm.
she's been holding on to this hope that Rowan's going to come and save her. But
Yeah.
now hearing that he's in Terrasin, she's like, that was a big turning point in her psyche in this in these chapters that we've read so far.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
My instant thought was, is Maeve lying? Did they
Yeah.
see a Lynn and know that she's being like there's an imposter posing as a Lynn and then take that information and also just say that Rome was there to mess with her?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like he's obviously not there, so I guess
No,
that
I
has to be the case.
think Maeve must have known that Aelin would be hoping that Rowan was coming for her, and she
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to make her lose every sliver of hope that she possibly could because Maeve is hoping to get Aelin
Breaker.
to do what she wants, right? Yeah, break her.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's this extremely heartbreaking scene where both Aelin and Fenris are in mourning.
Mm-hmm.
Poor Fenris. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Seriously.
Yeah, he's like obviously devastated at the loss of his brother. And Aelin is devastated at seeing him devastated and
Hmm.
also devastated that Rowan might not be coming or
Hmm.
isn't.
They literally were presented before Maeve, so Maeve could just
Destroy them,
destroy them. Yeah.
like their souls.
Yeah.
Uh, so at this point, as one might expect in this situation, Aelin starts to lose hope. Like for the first time, I think she's been so strong through this whole process.
Yes.
And I think for the first time, she really, truly starts to lose hope. And she gets visited by her mom. And her mom comes and tells her that it is the strength of this that matters, Aylin. And this made me wonder if something that happens to her during this like torture and then kind of being rebuilt essentially by because
Hmm.
healers come in after every torture and like
Yeah.
fix her up.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's something that happens to her physically through this experience that is going to be the key to her survival in the end. Like not just her surviving
Ooh.
Maeve, but like something's going to physically happen to her that makes her able to either bypass the promise, or I don't know. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I feel like this is alluding to like this needed to happen to you in order for what is going to come to be successful.
Right. Oh, okay. I completely didn't think of that at all, and I love that so much. Um, so yeah. So when she starts, so like because there's this really, so then she starts to repeat to herself like, "You do not yield. You do
Mm-hmm.
not yield." And then like as she's doing that, she starts like punching the sarcophagus. And so I wanted to know what your opinion was on this because like clearly she's hitting it with like this unearthly type of strength. She
Mm-hmm.
actually warps the lid and they start to kind of panic outside because it's like she's coming out. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering like how is this possible? Because she's got this iron everywhere and it's diminished all of her power. So how has she how?
Yeah, I wonder if it's just to show us how powerful she is as a person, even without her powers. Because, like, essentially, her powers should be muted at this point, like they or
Mhm.
like put on pause. So I think it just says, like, shows just like when she is inspired or like has like internal strength, that is like enough that she can do these impossible things. So it's not just that she's powerful because of magic; she's just a
Yes.
powerful being.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
I'm not
I
even
I
sure
was like
she's
I
what
was
she
like,
is.
man, if her power has been like power, because she's also weak, even though that the healers are preventing her muscles from atrophying.
Hmm.
She's not using them, so she feels physically weaker. So for her to
Hmm.
do this, I was like, whoa, like this really speaks to something deeper
Yeah,
and more intrinsic, I feel. So I was just thinking, yeah, I was just curious to know what your thoughts were on that. And I really liked what you had to say.
well, thank you.
But
And she does end up sending out like a magical pulse, like the one at Skull's Bay. So, like, through her physical actions, she does somehow emanate a magical burst.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's the
and
burst that
that's
Rowan had saw
that's exactly
or
that's what
felt.
he had felt. So perfect. That was good. Aelin is in a beautiful glen, and you can tell it's a vision that Maeve is forcing upon her. And Maeve has made it so that Aelin, it's sort of like everything that has happened hasn't happened, and oh, she's just her Auntie Maeve, and they're really happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where we get the story of Maeve and where she came from and how she's like a Val queen, basically. So this I loved this part because it like
Mm-hmm.
gave some real insight of like what Maeve is doing here and why Erewhon is pursuing her and everything. It was just like really good to finally hear that.
Mm-hmm.
So
It almost
then
makes her a sympathetic character
I
for
know.
a
And
moment.
so just for a moment, because I was actually like, as I was reading this, I was like, why is Maeve fighting so hard against all these people when she could rally everybody to just stop Erwin? But then it's like, but Maeve is evil. Look at the horrible psychological torture that she's inflicting upon like everyone. And like she's a
Mm-hmm.
bad, she's bad. So
Yeah.
like you can sympathize with certain parts of her history, but her like current ways of doing things, like she's just bad. She's a
Mm-hmm.
villain. So she's also, there was a quote she said like, not in the dark blasted realm in which they live, but worlds beyond that, living on top of one another and never realizing it. I was like, okay, so like we know they're from different realms, but to me it's like, is this a character actually acknowledging and confirming multiverses in Sarah's series?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, whoa, because that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I think it's been alluded to, but I think this is the actual acknowledgement that yes, like because we obviously knew there were different worlds because
Hmm.
like there's portals and you can travel like from the first book, Throne of Glass, it talked about portals to other worlds, but just the layering on top of one another kind of takes it to that next level of
Yeah, that's what I thought
multiverse.
too. Yeah.
Ultimately, Maeve is using this story to try and get Aelin to say where the keys are. So at one point in the story, like she's like, "Oh, and this the keys are hidden, blah blah blah," and she's like, "Where are the keys, Aelin?" Because like Maeve in this kind of fake world storyline always questions Aelin, and like she's basically her like teacher, her mentor. And so she's like trying to like question her about the story and get her to think about the story critically and like, oh, where would the keys have been hidden? But really it's just her in the real world trying to say, where are the keys hidden?
Yeah.
And yeah, but Aelin realizes it's not real and it's just one of Maeve's tricks. So she eventually kind of sees through the facade of it.
Yeah.
And I think she notices like her scars are gone and
Hmm.
and that triggers something in her.
Hmm.
And she's like, nope, this isn't real.
Yeah. And so she tells Maeve, like, no. And then that's the end of that. And it's not very
Mhm.
happy ending for Aelin because that Maeve didn't like that. So back in reality, Maeve then tells Aelin, like, she's like learned the location of another Wordstone collar. And so she's going to go get it and put it on Aelin.
Mhm.
And so Aelin, in the meantime, is going to be moved to a new location. So they put her in her sarcophagus that has been reinforced,
Reinforced.
and she ends up waking up in a tent. And Karen wants to torture her one final time before Maeve puts the collar on. And so he plans on burning her. And
Mhm.
so this is so crucial because he's going to take fire, which is obviously an intrinsic part of her, and make her afraid of it.
Yeah. This is, well, one, I'm surprised I didn't think of it earlier, but two, absolutely disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my goodness, this guy, he needs some therapy.
I think he's beyond that. I think he's
Yeah,
a
maybe.
lost cause,
Yeah, he's
honestly.
probably like someone who has no empathy and like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, he like literally
obviously.
gets off from hurting other people. And
Oh, and yeah, you say it.
okay, and she actually taunts him about that, and
Hmm.
like looks at his region to make her
Hmm.
taunting clear, like, yeah, I am talking about that. Like, you're probably one of those people who can't make things happen unless you're hurting somebody. And
Hmm.
boy, that sends him into a rage. And it's
Yeah,
true.
it's 100% true. And she picked up, I feel like she picked up on that earlier and
Hmm.
then is using that because she's like, if I'm about to get a Wordstone collar put on me, I would rather
I need to die.
be done.
Well,
So,
she would be a tool for Maeve,
mhm,
a weapon, right? So it
yeah,
would be
it'd
better
be
if
the
she
same
died. Yeah.
as giving the oath.
Yeah.
So she decides she's going to just taunt Karen into a situation where he like accidentally kills her.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what her plan is. And it leads to them fighting. But Fenris is watching this fight because he has to go along for all of this. He's being forced by the oath to watch everything that happens to her. So he was also taken to the camp. And he can't stand it any longer. He's like having this internal struggle. And he's like, I don't care if this kills me. I am not standing by any longer. And he breaks the oath to attack Karen so she can get away.
Yeah. And it's not just a simple matter of like, I've decided I'm going to break the oath. It's very physically hard to break the oath. And if the person who gives the blood oath to like Maeve breaks it, they die.
Mm-hmm.
And like Maeve has to release them from the oath in order for them to be able to live, and it's still very painful. But if that particular being breaks the oath, and it seems to me that they have to be very, very, very strong-willed in order to make this happen. Like you could probably try to break it, but you just can't. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe the pain of it stops um, the Fae, I guess, or whoever she's trying to get the blood oath sworn by.
Yeah.
Stops them. Well, he fights through that and he breaks that blood oath. So now he's kind of on like a countdown to
Mm-hmm.
dying.
I wonder if the death of his brother, in a way, gave him the strength to,
Yeah.
because he, like, one is like, my brother's dead. What do I have to live for?
Yeah.
So I'm not afraid of dying now, but
Yeah.
also kind of just the heartbreak that he went through seeing that. Maybe he's like, I've already experienced the most excruciating thing I can go through. And so then, like, what's
Yeah,
this?
absolutely.
Oh,
It was so intense. So then, because Aelin and Karen have been fighting, but what actually triggered Fenris into being able to do that, break the oath, was Karen threw Aelin against like a dresser, and I guess she
mm-hmm.
made like this really helpless, defeated little sound, and him
Mm-hmm.
like hearing that, like she's been so strong, and then to hear her make like such a, I want to say, like vulnerable sound of defeat, he was
Mm-hmm.
just like, and then he broke the oath and then he attacked Karen. It was
Right.
very like, oh my goodness. And also, as the reader, hearing that Aelin makes this helpless, defeated sound, it's disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
So, because of Fenris, Aelin is able to book it out of there. Like he tells her, run,
Run.
run, right? So she runs and she ends up running right for Lorcan's location. And so Lorcan sends a magical pulse to let like Rowan and Gabriel, like, hey, like this is where
She's
Aelin
here.
is.
Yeah.
And any Fae soldiers in her way, she is just decimating them. And Lorcan is like, he's in awe of her
Mm-hmm.
fighting, because
Yeah.
this is actually kind of satisfying, because like they know she's like badass with her wildfire and stuff, but they haven't really seen her in action with all of her assassin skills, plus when
Mm-hmm.
she's in Fae form, which makes it even more extreme and fast and intense. So
Mm-hmm.
when he sees her in action, he's like, whoa. Like,
Yeah. I
I
think
feel to
some people.
impress Lorcan, it would have to be pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I feel as though some people who are reading might be like, this is so unrealistic. She's just being trapped for 2 months. Like, no one would get up. But I think that's the point, is that even being tortured, she is still this strong after
Mm-hmm.
not being able to train for 2 months and being tortured for 2 months. This is her at her low point. This is what she can
Yeah.
do.
So imagine what she's like at full strength, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she, from her perspective, it's interesting seeing her perspective and then Lorcan's perspective, because from her perspective, she's very tired and fatigued and her legs feel like lead and she's having to like run up and down these hills and it's very hard for her. But
Mm-hmm.
from Lorcan's perspective, she is like, she's just like death on wheels kind of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. So Aelin, Gabriel, Lorcan, and Rowan have all now met. And they've come together, and Aelin just keeps saying Fenris and indicating that he's still in the camp.
Mm-hmm.
So, like,
And
despite
she
everything
points
she's
like,
just gone,
Fenris. Yeah,
yeah,
like,
that's like the only thing on her mind right now is like, get him out. So Lorcan takes her to where Alad is hiding, and Gabriel and Rowan go back for Fenris. And Rowan ends up completely just torturing Karen. And I'm like, part of me is like a little sad that he had to like do that. Well, he didn't have to, but like he chose to do that. But of course he did. Like, I think everyone expected it. But the most satisfying part of that is how we are informed that Karen ends up wetting himself when he
yeah.
realizes what's about to happen.
How dare he, too? He like inflicts this torture on other people and then he has the audacity to wet himself before he gets tortured. Like, come on. I'm sorry. That
It
is
just
just,
shows like how weak he is as a person.
yeah. So, meanwhile, Aelin, like, she still has the chains on, the mask on, and everything. And then there is just this really intense moment where she's like, take it off, take it off. And they can't get the mask off because the lock is so intricate. And they
Mm-hmm.
can't, like, she managed to free her hands from being chained together by very skillfully timing the strike of one of her opponents as she was running out. And then they cut right through the chains. But obviously, you can't do that so close to your head. So,
Mm-hmm.
she's like having a huge panic and she's just screaming over and over again, like, take it off, take
Mm-hmm.
it off, take it off. But she ends up actually kind of figuring out for herself good Lord. Like, can you imagine? She's just panicking, but then she figures it out because no one else can. They're all like, well, I don't know how to take it off.
Yeah.
They're trying to help her, but she's like, I guess I'll just be the answer to everything once again. And so she knows all those word marks from back in Throne of Glass. And so she knew how to unlock doors. So she's able to like sort of draw a word mark in the dirt. And then they realize like, oh, okay. So Rowan is able to like use, is it his blood to draw the word mark? Yeah. On the shackles. And then they come undone. So then it's like, oh, good. So then he's like, I know the word mark. So then he does it on the mask and the mask comes off finally.
Yeah, and they can't use her blood because it was specifically magic to not work with her blood, or else she would have just set herself free a long time ago.
Yes.
But Aelin examines her body once she's out of the mask and realizes that all of her scars are gone. Every single one. Her skin is like brand new, fresh skin. And that's because it literally is, because the healers have had to regenerate her skin. So what that means is she was so badly tortured that they literally had to remake her skin because
all of her skin is new. And so when she ends up surrounding herself by fire, because something we hadn't mentioned that was really another form of torture for Aelin, something we hadn't mentioned was her power was building up, because remember in Skull's Bay she signaled, but they also explained like she has to release her power. And she hasn't been able to do that for months. And so her power is building up. She's surrounding herself by a shield of fire. And then she goes to be with Fenris, who's basically laying there dying on the ground. And she's totally naked. And Rowan is looking at her and how like all of the scars are gone. And he realizes what that means. Like what you just said, like every inch of skin has had to be made brand new, which speaks to the extent of the torture she's gone through. So they can't hear what Aelin's saying, but they see that Aelin makes Fenris swear a blood oath to her, and her command to him is to live. And I was just like, oh my God. I thought when this moment was happening, they could see her mouthing the word like live. I was like, oh no, he's gonna die. Yeah. But then he didn't.
He lived, which I 100% thought like there's no way they can get out of this. Like he sacrificed himself. It was a worthy sacrifice. It was heartbreaking, but it made sense. And then they found that little loophole and I was like, oh my goodness, thank goodness. Oh, it was a very touching moment.
Yes.
And from that moment on, Fenris is like Aelin's little bodyguard dog. And he has been the whole time. He's just like continuing what he's been doing for the last 2 months. And like she keeps him in her little flame bubble and they just kind of walk side by side. And in the distance, they see the little folk like beckoning them, like, come this way. Yeah. I don't think the little folk talk, but they were like beckoning them to come. And as they're walking and following the little folk, we hear about another forest creature called forest spirits, and they're ethereal beings that are more ancient than the little folk. And I was like, oh, that's curious little tidbit of information.
Yeah. And something so new to be introduced in the last book of the series as well.
Yeah. So I can't wait to learn more about them.
Yes.
And they end up being brought to a cave.
So Aelin, and she's like naked.
Yeah.
But anyway, it doesn't matter, but just setting the scene for you. She doesn't care that she's naked. Like that's how, like where her psyche is at the moment. So she seems to be kind of like in a trance. And then she's like, the little folk brought me here. This is probably safe. So then she kind of curls up on the floor of the cave and goes to sleep. But I'm concerned for her.
Yeah, I'm very concerned for her psychological and mental like well-being. And I think that there's going to be some hurdles that need to be kind of jumped over as you do with hurdles.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely, like, I'm assuming that this group is eventually going to make their way to Terrasen. I feel like that's got to be what's next for them. But I mean, I just need them to get back to Terracin for my own well-being, because every time we get to the Idy and Lysandra storyline, I'm like in a panic that
Hmm.
everything's falling apart and that
Right.
she needs to be there. So
Yeah.
I hope that's where they go next.
Well, I would think that that would make sense, that that's where they would go next from what we know so far, just because they have positioned Aelin Lysandra
Hmm.
strategically in Terracin. So you would think that they would then bring the real Aelin to Terracin, especially knowing what Morath is doing and stuff.
Hmm.
So,
I guess the question is whether she can handle
yeah.
jumping into a war. But
Yeah.
we did talk about the wolf tribe and how we thought maybe they would come to save the Terracin armies and everything. Another thing that came up was when Rowan and his group went to that desert city. One thing that kind of was mentioned about that area is that there used to be dragons there, and that
Yes.
Maeve had like wiped out the dragons there. And it does specifically say that the dragons will not be seen again, but I don't know if I believe that.
Yeah. I guess it makes sense that Maeve would wipe out dragons, considering Valg and fire do not go hand in hand.
Hmm.
But it would be really cool if we were to see some dragons in this story. And I don't know how that would fit in, but it would be really cool.
Another thing that kind of pops up just randomly kind of throughout is that Dorian questions his brother's kind of conception. And we've talked about this previously as well. And he brings up, like, is there something innately Valg within Holland, who is his brother, because he was conceived while his dad was under Valg possession? And we do know that Duva's baby was 100% human because Irene checked. But I think I just thought it was interesting that this is being brought up again, because it
So,
could easily have not been.
what I wonder though is that Duva was pregnant when she was possessed already, right?
Well, I think she was possessed on her wedding night because she got the ring as a wedding gift.
Oh, right. And so, okay. Yeah.
So
So,
who knows if she already had conceived the baby before?
well, I think that if things stay consistent and Holland, although mind you, why would they bring it up if if it wasn't
Mhm.
something? But uh so Dorian like was raised with kind of an evil father just because his father was Valg possessed, but his strength
Mhm.
of character meant that he didn't turn evil. But Holland maybe doesn't have that same strength of character.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see the nature versus nurture on that. If
Yeah,
I'm just because it was brought up again, I'm assuming it's going to be
there's
addressed.
it must be.
Who knows?
Um,
And I thought this was an interesting fun fact. Manon is 117 years old, in case anyone was
wow,
wondering. We are
I
officially told her
was
age.
yes,
And another kind of fun fact, Rhiannon Crocken's crown, which is like a crown of stars, was taken by Baba Yellowlegs. And that was also randomly mentioned. And I was like,
yeah,
that just makes me wonder
yeah.
when that's going to come up again.
Just tuck away that little tidbit of information. A question I have for you to also ponder and consider is, remember back in Morath when the witches were being impregnated by the Valg?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, like, what happened? Was there any successful
I
Valg demon spawn?
I think there was, because when Allied went to spy on them, they were on their second round of being
Hmm.
impregnated. So,
Exactly.
what happened to the first round of
Yeah.
creatures?
I'm just wondering if we're going to be introduced to a new horrific creature that
Mhm.
is the result of these really disturbing experimental babies.
Yes. That would be kind of cool. Like, disgusting and disturbing, but
It's
it'd be
disgusting and
interesting.
disturbing, but it's an unanswered kind of question.
Hmm.
So I'd like to know if that's going to come up.
Yeah. I mean, they easily could have just been, if they're not mentioned again, I think it's assumed that they were destroyed
Yep.
in the collapse of that
Yep.
section of Morath. So I don't think it's like a loose end either way, but
No,
I think it
I'm
would
just
be
wondering if
interesting to
it's
see.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's going to be kind of like this unknown type of creature that they might have to
Mm.
fight, and it is a result of that, or they died from Caltaine.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a long one, so we appreciate if you stuck around to listen to the whole thing. Next week, we will be finishing part 1 of Kingdom of Ash.
We hope to see you there. Bye bye for now.